Hey, welcome back everyone to another episode of Bourbon Bytes. I'm your host, Terry McGraw with Cape Endeavors Incorporated. And today I'm very honored and blessed to be visited by Dr. George Shea from the Foundation of the Defense for Democracies. She is also the chief technologist with the Foundation for technical innovation or technology innovation. And you're also over the Transformative Cyber Lab initiative, I also believe. Thank you so much for joining us. I really do appreciate your time.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
No worries. So before we get started, I always like to sort of give the background to our guest because, and you have certainly an accomplished background and a pretty fascinating journey from where you began in this field to where you arrived. You are an expert in AI, cybersecurity, cyber warfare operations, sort of cyber warfare as a means of economic and espionage gain, as well as an expert in AI and the transformative impact that's happening. So I mean, we can dive into a lot of different areas. I really appreciate it. But do you mind just sort of giving the audience a feel for your background and how you arrived here to FDD?
Sure. Yeah. So first, I would say that I've been in the field and I've got enough education to know that I'm never an expert. So whenever anyone says they're an expert in something, I really have to kind of take pause and be like, really? I mean, I've learned that there's too much stuff to know, so I know that I don't know everything. So
Right.
I try to kind of step away from the title expert, but I would say I'm pretty knowledgeable and experienced with a lot of different areas. As for FDD, Foundations for Defense of Democracies, it's a think tank in the DC area. I don't think a lot of traditional cybersecurity experts really follow the think tank space, and it was new for me. I've been with the think tank now for I guess 5 years, and never really considered it, never really looked into it. I was more on the practitioner side of things in cyber. So that's one of the areas that really makes FDD, I think, different than other think tanks.
Mm-hmm.
Think tanks, I tell people are more influence operations kind of organizations. They're pushing some type of their ideas or their direction, their policy recommendations. And so when I talk to a lot of policy folks, especially on cyber, they may not have the background or experience really to understand those the bits and bytes aspects of cyber, the actual implementation, the operationalization of some of these policies or big great ideas that they have. So FDD's distinguishes themselves in that regard, in that I do have almost 30 years of practitioner experience. So I would say I kind of lack on the policy side, but I'm more on the technical side, which is an anomaly, I think, in the DC space. So what got me into this area, like I said, I've been with the think tank now for 5 years, FTD. Before that, I was a chief engineer at MITRE, working different projects, mostly with the Department of Defense, building systems, looking at the engineering aspects, looking at the cyber aspects. Yeah, before that, I was in the intelligence community. So I've worked what I would consider a spectrum of cyber issues over the past 20, 30 years, which at the time, I always question, I don't know if this is the right process or the wrong process, because you end up going into a job sometimes, like I work GPS. And so when I started working on the GPS system for cybersecurity, I was working with people who'd been working GPS for, 10, 15 years. So it's hard to walk in. I've never worked GPS or space systems and then say, I'm an expert. When you're working with the people, this has been their entire career. So I've ended up through my career kind of spending 2 or 3 years on different projects, moving from cybercrime to different engineering, different programs, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, command and control, DoD, to OSINT kind of stuff. So it's been a very large spectrum, which now in hindsight, which really kind of helps on the policy side, understanding all of those various aspects that really go into something. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that answered the question, but I've kind of been all over. I started originally in the late 99, early 2000s, getting into the cyber defense field when we originally started doing protection of critical infrastructure.
Well, I mean, your breadth of knowledge is certainly very impressive, but it's also the depth of knowledge. And one of the things we had talked about just sort of in prep for our session today was sort of the integrated and almost dependent nature that we have on software systems. If you look at Kaseya, SolarWinds, Microsoft, as far as software that led to cascading challenges, especially in the cybersecurity and, of course, cyber espionage portions of it. Could you give us a little sort of insight into the work and the knowledge base you have on sort of the secure building of software? You call
Yep.
it the secure build of materials, and why that's important. And a couple of sort of vignettes to drive it home for the audience.
Sure. So this is a great example of what I was just talking about. Sort of this stovepipe approach to a lot of different things, and really needing to have the experience and insight into how things relate to each other. So for software specifically, on the programming side of software, I'm going to go through. I'm going to do some programming. I'm going to develop software. There's practices that are generally accepted and used. So as a programmer, I'm not going to waste my time and my money, my budget, my resources on go reinvent the wheel, go recode this thing that I can just pull off of GitHub. Things like logging functions, timing functions, basic things that are in every single piece of software. So when you start to look at the composition of software, you'll find that 90% of all software is open source. Because again, as a program manager, as people who have to pay other people who write the software, why am I going to go through and pay for that reinvention of the wheel when I can just get it on GitHub? But when you start to look at the vulnerabilities of that, you're taking in software that doesn't necessarily have the known provenance. Who wrote it? How did they write it? What exactly is in it? Because people aren't going line by line looking at the code to see exactly what's happening. So this gets into another area, understanding software test and evaluation. So when you start looking at the software test and evaluation of how software is tested, you take the software, you look at the functional requirements. What's it supposed to do? It's supposed to do A, B, and C. You test it. Does it do it? Yes. Great. Wonderful. Then when you look at the cybersecurity aspects of software, that's a little different. Now you have the working software, and you start to look at the known CVEs, the known vulnerabilities that we're aware of with software. So you take the software, you scan it, you identify what CVEs are in the software, and you'll come back with different list of different priorities. So that only tells you the known vulnerabilities. That means that if there's a vulnerability in the software that hasn't been discovered, you're not finding it. Outside of the known CVEs, as I mentioned, who's writing this software? So you might have software that's open source that's being written by Chinese hackers that provide some useful function. Again, logging, timing, whatever you need to do for absolutely every piece of software. And then in the background, there might be dormant and passive things running. You don't know. You don't have the transparency. So it's important to have that bill of materials to understand where all this is coming from. Back to the test and evaluation piece of this, it's not just looking for the known vulnerabilities, but then you can also run various scans on software that look at the efficiency of the code. Like, is there dead code? But it doesn't understand what is the mission of the code and what's good and what's bad. So if you have well-written code in the background doing malicious things, it's not going to be flagged under some of these efficiency code scanners that'll say, yeah, it's well-written code. Great. So on the test and evaluation piece of software, you have to understand where adversaries can break in. And, I always kind of go back to basic military tactics, getting into the supply chain. Cyber, it seems like every time I talk to someone, they're like, cyber is new. I've been doing cyber for 30 years. I don't really consider it to be new. And there were people doing it before me, before it was called cyber. And then when you get down to what's happening, it's the same thing that's been happening since and it's kind of a cliche. I see it all the time, like the Sun Tzu acts of art of war. The deception campaigns, the infiltration campaigns. It's just moved to a different area. Now we're looking at it on the computers and the software, how people are programming versus just physical tactics. So
Do you find that
yep, go ahead.
do you find that programs like FedRAMP or Jen Easterly's push for secure software development in sort of the defense industrial base and critical infrastructure, and of course FedRAMP is generally reserved for those that are going to be used inside the government. But do you find that those programs go deep enough for SBOM materials, for software applications?
Do they go far enough? I would say no. So when I talk to I say more like RMF people. So risk management framework, FedRAMP, it's very similar process, just applied to different organizations, different systems. And so in that process, when you go through and you do the categorization, you select the controls, you test the controls, you implement the controls, and I talk to those testers. I will ask them, are you looking at the SBOM, the software bill of material? And the response I get is, what's an SBOM? And then when I talk to the SBOM community and I ask them, like, well, are you pushing this with, usually I say RMF, the RMF community, their response is, well, what's RMF? Because when you look at these different stovepipe areas, software developers and programmers aren't testers and evaluators. And then when you look at the cybersecurity evaluators, they're not software developers. So they're not used to the same, they're not aware of the same terminology, the same practices. So in the software bill of materials, there are steps and tasks within risk management framework that says look at the supply chain. So when you talk to the testers, what are you doing for the supply chain? They will, we just look at who built it. We look at Lockheed Martin, they're good, or Booz Allen, or whoever, whatever the contractor is. They look at the maybe the organization, but they don't dig into the SBOM of the software. And to give you an example of what'll show you, if I look at the software and then I decompose it, I look at the software bill of material. Now I can see all of the component pieces of software that are helping it. There might be a couple to hundreds in that first tier dependency, and then when you dig into those, there may be thousands. So I did a pilot on this project a couple years ago where I took a piece of software developed by the Department of Defense and then found it had 3 major dependency open source components that it was using. 3 is not too bad. That sounds good. But then when I dug into those 3, it was then 2,000 that supported this one, another couple thousand that supported the other. So then you find that this software that's been developed by who you thought, Bob Smith or whatever organization, it's really developed by a ton of different people. So it's not just the cybersecurity issues of who wrote it, what else is there, what are we really getting, but then there could be legal ramifications. Maybe there's some obscure piece of code someplace that has some intellectual property that belongs to somebody else that was then pulled in, that was then supported someplace else, or maybe this piece of code isn't being supported, isn't being maintained, and so you're kind of building this capability on an unseen foundation. Where did these components come from, and how are they maintained? Where did they originally come from? Who wrote it? So, as for Jen Easterly's Secure by Design, I love the way she looks at it. It's not vulnerabilities, it's poor software development. So develop the software securely, understand what you're getting, understand the supply chain, and build it securely. I actually take that initiative a step further outside of software. So I work again, a lot with the software bill of materials. But one of my other very passionate projects is cyber-informed engineering. So beyond software, actually building systems from a design that minimizes that attack surface area. So it's not just the cybersecurity controls of the software, but things like, one of the examples I use is the water purification plant. And if you were going to go through and poison an entire city or municipality, and you could hack into them and release chemicals, a lethal dosage of chemicals into the water, one of the design features you could do is, minimize the amount of harmful chemicals that can go into the water at a particular time. So you could do that through the diameter of the pipes or the size of the chemical reservoir holding those. It's not a security control. It's a design mitigation to ensure that the worst impact won't occur if there is a cyber attack. So, again, from the software secure by design, I try to take it all the way to the actual design and into the engineering aspects so that we're building things with the understanding of there is an attack surface and how do you build it so you've minimized that.
Yeah, and you raise a really, really challenging problem, and I think it gets even more challenging because if you look at and you're intimately familiar with our AI models and platforms, but even before we sort of saw the prominence of AI commercially, frame programmable gate arrays and GPUs. I mean, we're talking about the integration of hardware, firmware, software, and unfortunately, the majority of those are produced in geopolitically critical regions, influenced by China, which we all know we've sort of been in an active cyber war now for 25 years with. Do you find that integration is even well understood, or is even acknowledged as problematic given the speed at which we're adapting these capabilities, commercially?
I just had a conversation earlier today with my AI colleague, and we were discussing how, in my mind, I use cybersecurity as sort of the an example for the AI area. Everyone, although it's being adopted much faster than cybersecurity has been, everyone wants to use AI. Everyone's implementing AI, but we don't necessarily have the bumpers around it to understand what the vulnerabilities are, what the securities are, what the mitigations are, what framework should be out there. So, we were talking about software bill of materials. That's going to go through and tell you that the provenance of the software, where did it come from, how was it built, what's included in it. There's other bills of materials out there, hardware bills of material, SBOMs. We're also looking at the development of, I guess it's not a standardized bomb, but crypto bill of materials. What is your cryptography that you're using in your systems? That's going to be very important to know and understand as we approach quantum. And then, as you mentioned, AI, it's very important to have that transparency on those AI systems. And there's, pilot projects out there on the AI bill of materials. So what was used to build this AI system? What was the design for this AI system? What was the data that went into this AI system? What was the data that was used to test this AI system? And when I say test it, that's the information that's not there can be just as important as the information that is there. I teach occasionally. I'm an adjunct professor, and I'll ask my students, some basic questions like, "What is the hottest month of the year?" And inevitably, I get the answers: July, August, July, August, July, August. I'm like, okay, great. So now, if I'm testing a system and I've just used that input, that data set, and I'm testing it against just like U.S. standards, that's going to be correct. But if I'm now testing it on the use case of this is being deployed to South America, it's completely wrong.
Right.
So you've got to understand that the data that you're putting into it in conjunction with the design, purpose, and implementation I have a problem. This was
Operationalizing. Yeah.
Operationalizing. Thank you. Operationalizing the actual system to ensure all those things align. And I don't think we're quite, well, we're definitely not there yet in terms of that path, nor are we there yet on the consumer side to ask those questions to understand what that transparency looks like.
And even the leaders of these organizations these platforms have acknowledged that, the opaque nature by which they were designed, but even the retro engineering into the data that was used to build the models becomes almost impossible after, post launch. It like finding out where that data point went wrong, and where that bias gets built into the model. It really does become highly problematic. And are there standards bodies in the U.S. developing? I think in some respects, the U.K. is a little bit further ahead in the AI provenance laws, where they're they're at least having to attest to what AI model was used to develop what product and an end release, but I don't think that goes nearly far enough. How does one even begin to understand the subcomponents or the SBOM of an AI model if you were going to employ that in your environment? I mean, you almost have to build your own from scratch.
Yeah, aside from the building it from scratch, it really starts with understanding what is your mission, what is the sensitive data within your organization, your mission, and then in that AI process, what are the risks that you are bringing to the organization? So it's difficult for people to get their arms around all of this. It's a big area. Like, again, understanding the compliance piece, understanding the risk piece, trying to balance that, maximizing the capability so that you're still competitive with your counterparts out there that maybe are fielding it faster than you, maybe they're producing more than you, but then maybe they're more vulnerable than you. I have found that there's, over the past year, people are understanding more of the risk, whereas before I would talk to boards and companies and they would say, oh, well, we're not using AI. So I think we're past companies saying that they're not using AI, and they're understanding, regardless if you've authorized AI, people in your organization are using AI. So you need to develop a policy, and you need to quickly understand what the risk is with the AI, and it's not just maybe it's going to give you biased information, or it's going to give you skewed information, limited information. Maybe it's going to be dependent on too much, but it also becomes a security vector. And a compliance vector into your organization. So if I'm a user and you don't have a clear AI policy established, and I'm working in healthcare, and I have a patient, maybe I just plug in, Bob Smith came in with these symptoms. What might be the root origin of this issue, or whatever his medical condition is? I've just given away PHI. I can't give people's personal information into the system that's plugged into the internet and is now populating the mothership database that's out there. Even internally in the organization, I've heard stories where people may build their own AI, and they will partition it off so that it's not going out to the internet, but they haven't adequately partitioned it within their different departments. So I heard a story. This guy had put in a prompt, when's our next team meeting or a company meeting? And the response was, well, why? You don't care. You're not going to be working here by then. You're going to be fired next week. Like, oh, good to know. That's, maybe there should have been a little partition there between the HR that we're going to fire you and the, what he's asking for. So you really have to understand how the technology is being deployed, how it's being used, and how these interdependencies affect what the various missions within your organization. And again, as I mentioned, may hold you legally liable for different aspects. GDPR, PII issues, PHI issues. If you are putting information in there that can then hold you responsible for carelessly dealing with people's information, protected information, sensitive information, controlled unclassified information, the organization needs to quickly get a handle on that and establish a policy that's going to protect them as best as possible.
Is there an educational body or an association or authoritative sources that our audience members could go to sort of understand, how to understand the problem set, not much less decompose it to provide security and enablement, but do you have any recommended resources that folks in the community could turn to for further understanding?
Yes and no. So my first recommendation, always go to NIST. NIST has their AI RMF 100-1, which is the risk management framework for artificial intelligence, and it breaks down the system development lifecycle of AI. And so it doesn't necessarily give you that prescriptive step by step what you need to do to protect yourself, but it gives you the layout of understanding how it's built and where you need to be cognizant and how you need to assure all these things line up for the deployment of the systems that you're using. There's also, I know I wish off the top of my head, I could say like AI certs, organizations out there that offer AI education. But at the same time, I caution people with a lot of these organizations because I haven't seen, like, this is the authoritative CompTIA required for whatever certification for certain employment type things. So there are lots of organizations out there, ramping up on, here, I'm going to teach you AI. I always caution students on certifications and things that cost money. Don't pay for money. Don't pay for courses in education if you don't have to. And then if you are going to pay for it, then ensure that it's some type of authoritative program that is required someplace. Like, who's requiring it? Is it just like a great marketing, like this sounds good, or are you learning it for the fun of it? Or is it something like the DoD workforce requirements in cyber that say you have to have these certifications for this job? So those are the certifications you want to pursue because they're going to expand your marketability and your authoritative credentials versus Bob Smith's Learn AI 101. Like, well, that sounds great and I learned it, but if I got to pay money, I want to pay money for something that's going to be more accepted and recognized.
Yeah, I think it's almost a little terrifying. We have developers developing capabilities that they're not fully understanding the second, third order effects. We have people implementing said tools that don't know the provenance, much less the opaque nature of the model itself lends it makes it very difficult to understand sort of the security implications. And then, of course, sadly, we have a political body trying to legislate it has no understanding whatsoever of sort of the technology and its pitfalls, which I guess all the above doesn't paint a rosy picture, but I do think we as a community certainly need to be spearheading this. But I wanted to segue a little bit into China and this thread I keep bringing back up because I don't think the American public understands the degree to which China is decomposing the information streams of the United States for its own gain. I firmly believe we have accelerated the research and development arm of China over the last 30 years. And they've been in an active, I would say, cyber war with the U.S., whether it be espionage or putting hooks into critical infrastructure. But you also, you have a wide body of knowledge around sort of cybersecurity, cyber espionage, and sort of the components thereof. What are your thoughts right now about how well we, as the United States, understand the cyber war that we've been engaged in with China for quite a while?
Yeah, that's a pretty broad question. And we say we, it kind of depends on who the we is. Yes. And I've had conversations with people where on the cyber side and on the software side specifically, I mentioned software bill of materials, when Chinese hackers writing it, where I've been asked the question, well, who cares? Like, really, who cares? Like, if it's meeting the function, who really cares? The data is going to be out there. They're going to be able to get the information anyway. I need to be able to perform this mission and create my product. And we're okay with having tennis shoes from China. So why can't we have software from China? Mm-hmm. My position on that is, well, I'm more of a national defense, a strategic thinker. It's not about just completing making a mission for $1, but the overall ensuring of national security. China itself approaches things in a much more uniform manner. It's like one person, one fight. They have a goal of dominating information throughout the world. And unfortunately, for them, fortunately for them, however you want to look at it, they don't have the freedom to really diverge from what the government says. So they're going to support the government in those efforts. And then fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to look at it from the United States, we have freedom of thought. Our critical infrastructure is, I believe, 80 to 85% privately owned. So if I'm a business owner running an energy company and you're providing me these cybersecurity risks and issues and even providing, here's some solutions, and you're telling me it costs a certain amount of money, that's money out of, that's a cost source for me. I'm not making money off of being more secure. My goal is to maximize my profits. It's to provide whatever service or product that's there. And cybersecurity is one of these very ambiguous things from, I think, the C-suite. If you're going to ask me to enhance cybersecurity, give me that argument. Why do I need to? I haven't had a major attack ever, so why am I going to have a major attack now? If I wasn't breached last year and the security was good enough, why do I need to increase my security this year? Isn't it still good enough? So it becomes more of that free thought and capability of I'm good until I'm not good. And then all of a sudden, it's a $1 million, $1 trillion life loss, major catastrophe. That's a black swan event. I never thought this could happen to me. And if you're lucky, it's not going to happen to you. But it does happen. And then because everything is so interconnected, it becomes a national security issue because, a small company provides to a larger company that provides to critical infrastructure. So these decisions that are being made by, again, I'd say 80% of privately owned companies may be coming from different prioritizations. My job is to provide X. I've got X amount of dollars. I can't provide 90% of my budget to cybersecurity. I have to provide it to research, manufacturing, employee, payroll, competing resources. And it's not necessarily that it's wrong, but they have maybe just not put the priority on cybersecurity like I would say definitely federal systems. And I'm not going to say they have an unlimited budget, but here is your cybersecurity budget. Here is your cyber command. Here are your cyber people. It's a little different in the commercial world that actually runs the country, again, at 80% of critical infrastructure ownership.
Yeah, I think we've arrived at sort of George Akerlof's markets of lemons. We've created an information asymmetric marketplace. As businesses, I mean, if I make truck tires, I make truck tires. Cybersecurity is a margin hit to my production of truck tires, and the degree that I can outsource that, minimize that, from a margin and profit and loss statement, it makes perfect sense to the manufacturing plant. However, you now have created a information, asymmetry between those that are giving you the cybersecurity capabilities and your ability to understand what they're actually giving you for the price point you're paying. And so as we've created this where the understanding of the cybersecurity, what it does and does not do, what it fits into and what doesn't fit in your environment, is grossly lacking in the boardroom and the executive suite of much of our infrastructure and manufacturing base. And I think that's been a problem. I know you've been an opponent, or not opponent, but you've been critical of the CMMC program, and your thoughts on that are well articulated. But I don't know, other than maybe a cyber, like a cyber Sarbanes-Oxley, where publicly traded companies, the SEC, I think, is trying to get after it. I think CMMC is trying to get after it, but we almost need something that forces less asymmetry in the marketplace, where we have an attestation level and an understanding. I mean, we now have standard gap principles for accounting. We have Sarbanes-Oxley. What are your thoughts on sort of, I hate to say legislation because I'm kind of allergic to it, but I don't know how you can force or not force, but encourage or otherwise compel parts of vertical markets that have been lacking in regulatory compliance bodies, and now we have this huge disparity that's going on. Do you have any thoughts on sort of how we bring the marketplace to a more secure state?
Yeah, my first thought is the small, mid-sized companies. So those SMBs that are out there, it might be one or two people. Even our like water municipalities, these water plants, it might be one or two people. And then when you layer on like, hey, again, the competing priorities, we need you to do all this cyber stuff. There, their first question is like, what is cyber and what is this stuff? I'm trying to do the core mission, and now I've got to do all this other stuff. I don't have the resources, I don't have the people. So just making resources available, I think is very important. Those sector risk management agencies that are out there for the various sectors of critical infrastructure, I think it's imperative for them to have the relationships with their industries, these public-private partnerships to help advance cybersecurity. There's a big difference between like a company. I mentioned Lockheed Martin earlier, like a Lockheed Martin, Booz Allen, Boeing, going through CMMC versus Bob Smith, company of two people trying to start a company. It's a lot more overhead, a lot more confusion, a lot more not understanding. It adds those obstacles to those SMBs that are trying to get off the ground, trying to be successful, trying to get into mainstream, trying to provide their services. So I don't say on the legislative side, but definitely on the resource side, there needs to be capabilities and resources, education available to them on for free. That would be fantastic if it was free. I know CISA had a large outreach. The a couple other organizations have some resources, but it ends up for these SMBs. There's a stat with the Small Business Administration, 60% of SMBs go out of business within 6 months of a breach, a hacker breach. And so if you're standing up a company, I'm standing it up first time. Cyber is not on the, it's nowhere on the plan. I'm standing up the company. I'm trying to get the products. I'm trying to build my network. I'm trying to, get my name out there. I'm trying to build a manufacturer. Cyber is an afterthought. It needs to be built in from the beginning. They need to understand that. But unfortunately, it is a cost sector and becomes very difficult. On the legislative side, it is very important. The protected information, your PII, your PHI, protected healthcare information, your personally identifiable information, being compliant with things like the General Data Protection Regulation, GDPR, the controlled unclassified information, foreign contracts information. All of these different types of information are imperative to handle and store securely. So I do agree with the compliance requirements that are out there, but we have to be able to give the tools to the organizations out there to ensure that, or at least clear understanding of how to do it. I know you mentioned CMMC. CMMC has now been around for 7 years, 5, 6, 7 years. It was in a pilot discussion. Yeah. So it's approaching a decade. So approaching a decade on how to do CMMC. Companies, especially small companies, how do I get into the space? What does this mean? This is not required for organizations outside of DoD. So if you're outside of DoD, the Defense Industrial Base, this is a new requirement, another thing you have to do in addition to the other areas, PCI, like I said, GDPR, PHI, all these different areas. So we really need to, from a legislative standpoint, harmonize what this looks like. So me as the small, mid-size, or even large company, I'm not trying to go through and understand what are all these different laws that pertain to me because I'm now doing business across a state or across international boundaries, or it's this type of data or this type of data. Like that in itself, just trying to figure out what all you have to do is a full-time job, let alone actually doing it, and then let alone having the resources to do it, because there's so many not, I don't say conflicting, I'll just say so many different layers of legislation, so many layers of compliance that could be harmonized, that could be just more made more efficient to organizations, whether through like their sector of critical infrastructure or well, I guess their sector of critical infrastructure. Like that would be a great way to start.
Yeah, I sort of take so we started, I guess, roughly 4 years ago. We are a small to mid-size enterprise company, and I realize that we, of course, are cybersecurity professionals. But the reality is, building an infrastructure that your business is going to run off securely, it doesn't have to break the bank. I think there's a lot of misinformation and a lot of hyperbole, and a lot of folks trying to capitalize on the uncertainty of this sort of market for lemons. But I implore companies, and if it's compulsory, so much the better. But like, we're talking about your stat for the SBA is absolutely correct. And I've done incident response engagements globally for many years, and I will tell you that is an existential threat to your business. And if you don't consider this, and I don't even care if it's for the DoD or the other aspects of the Fed, the reality is the things that 800-171 lays out in other NIST guidelines are best security practices. They're very low on the managerial overhead, very high on archival evidence to say you're doing it. I would argue that you almost it's almost malfeasance to not consider these things if you're going into business with other people's money, other people's equities at stake, much less trying to make a profit yourself if you want to stay in business. So I'm a big proponent on if not compulsory, at least creating a framework by which people, even have to voluntarily, no one says you have to sell to the DoD, but if you're going to sell to the DoD, it's the taxpayers' money. You should be standing up to say, I'm going to protect it to a higher degree than anything else I have. So is CMFC perfect? No, I can poke holes in it all day long, but it's a hell of a lot better to have someone inspecting the homework than not. But again, that is sort of the top layer, as you've already pointed out. There's so many subordinate layers to that, right down to the software that we're employing to do all of that. So but anyway, I want to pivot a little bit in the last couple minutes.
Well, actually, can I just respond to that real
please.
quick?
Yeah.
So,
Sorry.
I agree with what you're saying, but I find that's cyber people for cyber. So if I'm not a cyber person, I don't know cyber. I don't. It's just not a priority. Again, I'm trying to stand up my business. I'll get to it later, and then I would consider myself a cyber person, but I'm not a cyber for cyber purpose
Right.
kind of person. So I look at the mission, and I mentioned I supported DoD for a large chunk of my career, and I look at capability. So sometimes I will take the risk of a compromise to have the capability. And one of the examples I use, it's the top of my list of an example of getting capability out as soon as possible. I was working science and technology at the Pentagon in the early 2000s when we first started to encounter IEDs, your improvised explosive devices. And there were capabilities that were being developed on being able to find IEDs to save soldiers' lives. And in all of these capabilities, there's still a requirement, go through and become cyber compliant today. And so when I think about a capability that could save a life with like the deployment of an IED detection versus nope, it's 100% cyber secure, and we had to wait the extra year to make it that way before we deployed it, that doesn't make sense. So I think it's imperative that you understand what the mission is, and then what the risk is, and you weigh that risk on like, okay, do we have to have 100% perfect cyber, or is it the alternative of just get the capability out there because of the greater good on whatever it's doing? And a lot of people will, especially not cyber people, will look at I just got to start the business, I got to do this, and then the cyber becomes an afterthought. But again, that's usually not taking in the interconnected pieces and the other rippling effects. But in some cases, you don't always have to do perfect cybersecurity just to get that capability you need.
No, I agree. I think in much in line with the rapid fielding, though, is it. And so I'm a former soldier of almost 3 decades and served downrange on multiple occasions. I'm all about capabilities that we can employ for defense and offense. But also there is, the problem of not baking in that stuff is that at some point your adversary hijacks your drones because you didn't think to encrypt the data signal between your command and control box and the actual drone, and you lose assets on the battlefield. I think that rapid fielding also needs a follow-up, right? So I guess the thing is I don't think it's an all or nothing, but to give folks a pass because it's hard to understand, I don't really buy.
Oh,
It's
no, no,
really
no,
hard to
no. I'm not
understand.
saying that. Don't give them a pass because it's hard to understand. I just understand like there's a large knowledge gap out there.
There is. No, there
And people have
absolutely
different
is.
priorities. Yeah.
I know. I guess if you don't make it a barrier to entry, then no one will consider it a barrier. I do think that, as just my personal opinion, and maybe I am cyber for cyber's sake. It's just I've seen the dire consequences. I've actually led some of the largest IR cleanups in the world, and I will tell you there are existential threats to even large business. And so I implore people to consider it. But that said, I don't. I just want to be a little contrarian, just for the sake of the argument. so,
No,
and
I don't
I
think you're being
do.
contrarian. I think we're kind of
Uh,
saying the same thing.
um, I would like to pivot to your work on the Transformative Cyber Innovation Lab that you're doing with FDD, and I think the cyber labs are fascinating, but we haven't used them to great effect yet. And what are you doing with your innovative lab, and what are some of the outcomes of that experimentation, if you will?
So, like I said at the beginning of this discussion, one of the TESOL, the Transformative Cyber Innovation Lab, is what I think separates FDD from other think tanks in the DC area. It's designed to explore underutilized technologies, emerging technologies, underutilized processes that can help advance cybersecurity for the sake of national security. So you have to be able to understand what's out there, the processes, and then how can we make things better. We talked about SBOM. So in the TESOL, my job is to run these pilot programs to demonstrate these various processes or technologies and how they can advance cybersecurity for national security. With SBOMs, or software bill of material, I had done a pilot with some industry partners. I'll reach out to companies who are experts in this area. This is what they do 24/7. We looked at some software, we decomposed it, we did the analysis on it. We look at the analysis you can get from an SBOM. Again, not just the provenance, the code, the signatures, but now the open source. Who wrote this? Like, who's this guy who did this? Oh, he's a Chinese hacker from the PLA. Do we want that in our weapon systems going into whatever? So then after demonstrating the capability of these tools or technologies, I then provide policy recommendations. So with this particular exercise, I had done this pilot. One of the policy recommendations I called out specifically was incorporate software bill of materials into the National Defense Authorization Act. You should not be purchasing or procuring software without knowing where it's coming from and having that provenance. That should be a requirement, especially for federal systems. One of the other requirements that I put in there, I would say very specific to my background, knowing this was incorporating the requirement for SBOMs into the cyber survivability attributes of the cyber key performance parameter, cyber survivability key performance parameter for all systems within DoD. So I wrote this paper. I sent it to the J6, Steve Pitcher, who was running the survivability KPP for cyber. They then have the survivability attributes, which are requirements for all systems that are being built or bought and going into DoD. And he said, "Oh yeah, this makes sense." And so they incorporated SBOM into one of their CSAs. So instant
Excellent.
impact, instant requirement for systems. So I was very happy with that. So that's what I do with TESOL. I will look at these, again, emerging technologies, underutilized technologies, and then identify where the gap is in their utilization, and then demonstrate how they can advance capability, and then write a paper. Maybe it's picked up, maybe it's not picked up. One of the areas, common recommendation for whenever you talk to anybody, what can be done about cyber? I mentioned it myself. Public-private partnerships, sharing information. That's I'd say a go-to talking point for everyone. We have to be able to fight a network with a network. My lessons learned are now your lessons learned. We don't all have to go through the same pain to learn things. So in these public-private partnerships, the big obstacle becomes sharing information. We just talked about all these different types of information, your PHI, your PII, trust issues. Why am I going to share information with the government? Why am I going to share information with my partner organization if that becomes another vector for compromise, or they've then become compromised, or something happens and because I shared the information, now that's going to reflect on me. So how you share information becomes one of those other gaps. And I've been looking at technologies like zero knowledge proofs that will enable people to share information without sharing the actual data behind the information through like a series of yes/no questions. I describe it as like a game of I Spy. If I need information from you, we can play this game of like I Spy. Is it this? Is it this? Yes, no, yes, no. I now know the answer, but you never told me it's the green car on the side of the road, but I know it's the green car on the side of the road based on the questions I asked you. And it's indisputable. There's also other type of technologies that are underutilized, like tokenization, that allow for information to be morphed into unreadable formats where if they are intercepted, if there is a man in the middle, if it is compromised, then you're not going to lose the actual information itself. They just have the tokens. So I think that's a fantastic way to go through and add another layer of security. It's also a way to help to start preparing for our PQC world, or our post-quantum cryptography world, where we're worried about the hack now, decrypt later, and then moving over to these new algorithms. And eventually those new algorithms need to be replaced with other new algorithms. So if you use things like pseudonymization, tokenization processes that eliminate those algorithms altogether, add another layer of security, it becomes a strategy, a long-term strategy to ensure the security of your data versus just a compliance checklist. So that's what I do with TESOL. I go through and explore these different areas and try to enrich the decision maker to make better decisions for long-term security.
Can the public access the work products of the TESOL?
Oh, absolutely. Yep. You just go to fdd.org. You can search by my name, and then it has all of my products and papers where I've put things out and advocated for certain things.
And I guess one of the last questions on the TESOL is particularly around SBOM, because I think this is a critically important shortfall in the marketplace, for lack of a better term. Do you have pragmatic resources to how to do an SBOM well, or how to even begin decomposing or researching something that you have as a critical dependency in your infrastructure?
Yeah. So I would say CISA has been phenomenal with the SBOM effort. A couple years ago, they started an SBOM working group. So SBOM, there's a lot of resources on SBOM on the CISA website. There's the NTIA, which has done extensive SBOM research and working groups. What are the minimum elements? How would you work on this? NIST has some information on SBOM. I would have liked to see them go a little bit further. They put up their SSDF, their secure software design framework on how to design software more securely. And they mentioned SBOM. Like, for example, ask for an SBOM. Okay, well, that kind of, you could have done a little bit more there, but it puts it into the larger context of here, go through, and they did mention it. But yes, I would definitely start with CISA as a belly button for resources on SBOM.
Excellent. Last, and as we finish up the conversation, I always want to sort of uh, lend ourselves to folks just getting started. I've been a very big advocate of sort of enabling folks that are not overly represented in our field. And so if, there's a young lady looking at you in this podcast going, how do I become George? Do you have recommendations, like resources for folks that want to get started in this field? Do you have mentor programs you participate in, or are there organizational bodies that you support, et cetera, for folks that, young females who want to get into this space or follow the paths that you've blazed?
Yeah, the Cyber Guild, I think, is a fantastic organization. They focus on women in STEM and cyber. I I don't like to limit it to women. Like,
Yeah,
if
it could be
guys want
it.
to be in this field too. Like,
Yeah, yeah.
I promote the field to anyone and everyone. Like I said, the Cybwix is an organization. The Cyber Guild is an organization. They focus specifically on bringing women into the field. As for resources, it depends on what you're interested in. Not to be too, I don't know, stereotypical, but I find that females tend to be more nurturing, more emotional. Men tend to be more what is it more about technology, the ones and zeros, the programming, the less feeling aspects of
Mm-hmm.
things. So I, I've I have three stepdaughters and two nieces. I have been trying to get them into cyber, and no one cares. They're not interested. So I've got a couple nurses and a PA and like a interior designer. I don't think people understand that cyber is not sitting in the back room programming. It's really about those asymmetric warfare,
Yeah.
helping people, understanding the field and what that looks like, policy, cyber psychology, all of these are fields that I think appeal to that more, sensing nature that
Mm-hmm.
women tend to have. I think I'm more of a math logical person, so I think I'm more of the male brain kind of person, which is why
Mm-hmm.
I'm here, and I ended up here through my start in mathematics. But there's cyber is so big that there's, I think, room for everyone.
At the
And
table.
even
Yep.
if you're an artist and a humanitarian, there's the new creative aspects of cyber art, what you can create with AI. Oh, this is interesting on AI. We talked about AI and some of the vulnerabilities. Uh, when I talk about AI vulnerabilities, I'm thinking data poisoning and aspects like that. But there was a database. It's a spreadsheet that was put out by MIT last year on. It's a consolidation of all of the papers that have been written on AI vulnerabilities, and they included things in there like loss of culture, where AI is then developing music and art that is a mixture of so many different things that it doesn't stem from a particular culture. I'm like, oh, well, that's interesting. So, I think that it's a growing field that fits
Mm-hmm.
everyone and whatever their interests are. It's just a matter of recognizing where that is. As for the more traditional, like cybersecurity aspects of thing, I would look at NIST to go through and understand the ground truth on what the guidance is.
Mm-hmm.
Mentorship, the Cyber Guild, I think is fantastic. LinkedIn, I think, is an incredible tool. It's going to depend on your personality. If you're okay with reaching out to people and talking to people, reach out and talk to people. There's no constraints on LinkedIn. If I see an expert that's doing something, send them a message. Hey, this looks really interesting. I'm very fascinated with this. You can join different groups in there on different topics. I myself, if someone sends me a message, I try to respond to them. I've met people over LinkedIn that I've never met in person, and I would consider us to be, colleagues, friends, people I can reach out to. I'll even send them my papers, like, hey, here's a paper I've written. I'd like your perspective on it, which I've done a couple times. Maybe that's kind of strange. There's a gentleman on LinkedIn that got into cyber he was a teacher, like I think an elementary school teacher, middle school teacher, wanted to switch careers. So he was always posting about his journey in cyber and like his understanding. So I've sent him papers in the past, like, does this make sense to you? Like, how are you interpreting this? Because, again, from the cyber expert to cyber expert, that doesn't help anybody. You
Right.
have to be able to reach everybody. So I like the perspectives of everyone. Yeah. I would say don't, as for resources out there, just don't limit yourself. There's plenty of tools. You can use AI. Go to AI, put in a prompt. What should I be doing to get into this field? Who should I be talking to? Find a mentor. I think that's very important. Ask questions. Absolutely do not be afraid to ask questions. My son's actually starting a cyber internship at the end of the month, and I'm very excited. Very excited for him. I know he doesn't want to hear what I have to say because I'm his mom. I don't know anything. So I said, just take a notebook with you, and every time someone says something that you don't know what they're saying, because everyone is going to use a ton of acronyms, especially in the DoD doing cyber. It's a cyber acronym. It's a DoD acronym. Sometimes it's the same acronym. Write it down, and at the end of the day or the end of the week, when you get together with your whoever, ask them, like, what does this mean? Because you don't want to find that now a year has gone by or the entire internship and people are saying things like C&D, and you're like, what are you saying? I don't know what that means. So ask the questions and step out of your comfort zone. Like, take the risk. You're only going to learn when you put yourself in the environment to learn. If you only do what you're comfortable doing, then you're never going to grow.
Yeah, that's great advice. I had a friend of mine named Steve who, when I was first coming into the commercial world, he drew a giant circle and a little circle, and he said, "This big circle is everything that you're familiar with and your comfort zone." And he drew that little circle. He said, "But that's where the magic happens," and it's true. You really do have to sort of step outside that comfort zone if you ever want to grow. So, George, you're an amazing resource. And as a citizen and a patriot, I want to thank you for the work that you do on behalf of making us more informed, and really driving a lot of these initiatives to home, especially in the DC area, which can be rather insular, I think, from the rest of the world. But I do appreciate you offering some sanity there. I know that your time is incredibly valuable, so thank you for giving us an hour of your time. I highly, highly, highly recommend our audience reach out and avail themselves of the resources that you provide at the FDD, and the lab itself. So I really, really appreciate you joining us, and you're welcome back anytime.
Great, wonderful. Well, thank you again for having me.